Was studded Technic really better? For half of Technic's lifespan, all of these sets were primarily studded. But which type of LEGO Technic is truly the king? In order to properly answer the question, we need to analyze the four main categories: the community of both systems, the impact, playability, and aesthetics. I will give a point to either studded or studless Technic for each of these categories. Whichever Technic style gets the most points will be the ultimate winner. Believe it or not, the Technic community was actually really strong even in the early days. LEGO strongly encouraged you to build your own Technic creations with the wonderful idea books, which all contained some of the most advanced mechanisms ever. Before the internet though, there are only two ways of sharing your own creations. First, you could simply gather feedback from your friends and family, and the second way, which in my opinion is way more interesting, involved submitting a photo of your own creation into the Bricks and Pieces magazine. Personally, my favorite mock has to be the following car chassis. It is just so advanced and even featured a working transmission. Wow! Fans were creating so many advanced creations, though unfortunately, finding any records of mocks before the internet is next to impossible, so not much about this time period is known. Online LEGO forums began springing up right in between the transition of studded and studless. Now, fans all over the world could finally connect in one place, gather feedback, share their own creations, and much more. Steve Hassenplug created the first major LEGO Segway, which ended up getting featured on screensavers, amassing worldwide fame. Later, fans would create a plethora of different mocks, many of which are featured on Brickshelf, Rebrickable, the LEGO Gallery, Instagram, and many more places. Sharing your own creations online allowed you to receive opportunities of a lifetime. Around 2010, the official LEGO Technic website hosted monthly competitions. One of the participants was Milan Reindl, who actually got his legendary creation featured on the Technic blog. The LEGO company recognized his talent, and in April of 2012, he moved to Denmark to become a LEGO Technic designer, a job he was dreaming of for 5 years. As a designer at LEGO, he would create many legendary sets like the Heavy Lift Helicopter, the Land Rover Defender, among many others. On his YouTube channel, he actively creates B models for large sets that don't have one, and because they're made by an actual LEGO designer, they're as close to being official as possible. Because so many adult fans of LEGO could express their creativity through the LEGO forums, and because this time period changed the life of one of the greatest LEGO designers of all time, I simply have to give the point to studless Technic in the community category. There is simply way more community innovation that happened in the studless era, including working pneumatic engines and so much more. Next, let's examine the impact that both studded and studless sets had. Studded Technic sets received all of the main innovations. We got the transmission first introduced in 1977, we got pneumatics in 1984, a motorized pneumatic compressor was introduced in the AirTech Clorag, and finally, the distribution gearbox was featured in the Space Shuttle for the first time. Of course, we also got steering, suspension, and other noteworthy functions. All of these are at the core of LEGO Technic and are featured in many modern sets. Furthermore, studded Technic introduced the Technic figure, which had great articulation and is something not present in modern Technic. Studded Technic is completely compatible in LEGO system sets and is used in many of those as structural support. So was there anything left to introduce in the studless era? Many important mechanisms were largely refinements of old ones, but the single most important innovation during this era is definitely power functions, which allowed you to control Technic sets with infrared, and it was first seen in the motorized bulldozer. However, IR control has been a part of LEGO well before 2007. The Mindstorm's RCX robots could be controlled with an infrared remote, so perhaps IR control is actually more of an innovation from the studded Technic era. Regardless, we still received the single greatest LEGO Technic set of all time in the studless era, which is the 8043 motorized excavator. For the first time, it introduced a fully remotely controlled distribution gearbox, and it had so many advanced mechanisms like passing 2 independent motions through the center of a single turntable, and so much more. Furthermore, we received the servo motor in 2012, which allowed you to build more compact return-to-center mechanisms. 2015 gave us the multi-directional gearbox, which was even used in the V22 Osprey. Later, we got the Control Plus system, which at first wasn't customizable, but now you can do pretty much anything you want with it, including programming with Python. Recently, we also got the Mercedes-Benz Z-Tros trial truck. While overpriced, it still brought the awesome innovation of differential locking. In this category, it's honestly very difficult to find a clear winner. Studded Technic introduced a bunch of new mechanisms, so I'd say while the Studded Technic is more mechanically revolutionary, Studless Technic certainly brought us way better at electronics. But still, because LEGO Technic is mostly about mechanisms, and many of those mechanisms were first introduced in the Studded Technic while Studless was more refinements, I have to give the point here to the Studded Technic. Now, let's examine the playability. The functions of the non-RC sets from either era are almost the same. Both eras feature basic things like suspension, steering, and more. Personally, I think that remotely controlled sets are a lot more fun to play with, especially if they also have a motorized gearbox. I would even argue that the new powered-up motors are much better for playability. While they are certainly overpriced, it has never been easier to combine Mindstorms and Technic than it is right now. Currently, you can learn about mechanisms and programming, while before it was only about the mechanisms. On the other hand, using power functions in 9-volt electronics is simply way easier. It's a simple plug-and-play experience and everything just works. You don't need to use a third-party smartphone. While I do prefer programming in LEGO Technic, most fans would rather have a simple plug-and-play experience. The older systems were much cheaper, way easier to use, and didn't require a whole new learning curve. Still, for the majority of Studless Technic, power functions was the main electronic system, and I think that RC sets are a lot more fun to play with. In the development process of the 2007 motorized bulldozer, there were 2 prototypes created. One was remotely controlled, while the other one was manual with pneumatics. The test group ended up preferring the remotely controlled version. RC was simply non-existent in Studded Technic. As a result, I have to give the point here to the Studless Technic. Finally, we have the aesthetics. Studded sets like the Space Shuttle, AirTech Clawrig, and much more all look incredible. Ultimately, Studded Technic looks a lot more like your traditional system set. The Space Shuttle even featured minifigure compatibility. Studded Technic just looks better when placed in an environment surrounded by studs. For example, Studded Technic looks better in a LEGO city. Studless allows you to have much more compact builds, which allows for more complex mechanisms in smaller sets. Studless has a lot of panels, which makes everything smoother and have a lot less gaps. Ultimately, the aesthetics really boil down to personal opinion. Personally, I think that Studless Technic looks better, which makes it the ultimate winner. Although, keep in mind that the vast majority of sets I own are studless, and I grew up with Studless Technic, so of course I will prefer studless, although Studded Technic definitely has a ton of advantages over studless, such as system compatibility, whereas the new system is almost impossible to use in traditional LEGO builds. Do you prefer studded or studless Technic? Please let me know down in the comments below, and if you'd like to see a comparison between LEGO System and LEGO Technic, then click on the video right over here. This is your Unbreak Me here, and I'll see you in the next one.